Rome was in turmoil, not like the clamor of a shouting crowd, but like the ominous hum of a cracked slab just before it collapses. Hearings were underway in the Forum, senators gathered in the Capitol, and whispers flitted among slaves and clients in the alleyways. It was the end of the Republic, though no one dared to speak of it aloud. At that time it was labeled a crisis, as if everything that was crumbling could be salvaged with a single law or the replacement of one individual. A senator sat in the shade of the colonnade, scrutinizing the faces of passers-by. He knew that none of them comprehended the intricacies of the world in which they lived. They had heard of the Senate, the consuls, the people, but they lacked an understanding of who truly made the decisions, who tugged at the strings, and who traded the future of Rome for votes. "The Senate is the heart of Rome," said some. "The Senate is a rotting corpse," countered others. Yet both factions congregated in the same hall, beneath the arches of the Curia Julia, enveloped by marble and malice. In this chamber they determined who to declare an enemy, whom to forgive, which wars to commence, and what laws to enact. Here speeches crafted by rhetoricians but dictated by fear echoed within the walls. Magistrates changed every year. 2 consuls, like gladiators in an arena, vied for influence, voting against each other, scheming, rallying supporters. Neither of them ruled. Both sought to survive in a game where the loser sacrificed not merely their position, but their life. Praetors administered justice but turned a blind eye to the laws when coins of silver lay before them. Censors monitored morality but had long forgotten its meaning. They could expel a senator from the Curia for debauchery or embezzlement, yet more often than not, they simply accepted bribes and feigned ignorance of the street rumors. When true calamity struck, war, insurrection, famine, Rome summoned a dictator. He was appointed not by popular vote but by the consul's decree, for a term not exceeding 6 months, absolute power, non-appealable, without senatorial objections. 1 man, 1 sword. Yet the dictator was a weapon of last resort. They feared to call upon him, for no one knew if he would relinquish power afterward. Rome had known such figures before. Sulla, who entered the Curia with the swords of his legions. Caesar, too, who crossed the Rubicon, bringing war directly to the Senate. And the people? The people listened. Centuriate assemblies, where a soldier's voice outweighed that of a pauper, elected magistrates. Tribal assemblies, where plebeians clamored for bread and land enacted laws. But all of this was mere theater. Decisions were preordained. Voting blocks were bought like goods at a market. Trust was worth less than a denarius. Compromising evidence cost a life. The army called the shots. He who commanded legions needed no senatorial orations. He would enter the city, raise his standards, and Rome would listen. Soldiers swore allegiance not to the Republic, but to their commanders, not to laws, but to generosity. Loyalty was measured not by duty, but by the share of the spoils. And so, in this world, cracked, unstable, blood-stained with marble, a man emerged. He was neither a hero nor a tyrant. He was simply a senator. He had no army, no support from the populace, not even the assurance that he would not be accused of conspiracy come tomorrow. Yet he ascended to the rostrum. He spoke, to remind that Rome was still alive. That word still held significance. That oratory was not only a weapon but also a shield. This is his story. The senator entered the Curia early in the morning. The herald's voice had yet to sound, the marble had not yet warmed in the sun, and the mosaic beneath his feet felt icy. He walked slowly, as if pondering each step, but in truth, he was listening. Servants hurried by with tablets. Guards conversed in hushed tones. Senators whispered in side alcoves. Politics in Rome did not begin with speeches. It began in the silence, where interests stirred. A seat in the back row, not among the inner circle. He had not yet reached the summit, but he was on the path. Appointed by the popular faction, supported by several influential families, including one patrician lineage. A compromise, the result of intricate negotiations. His presence in the Senate was no miracle, but the outcome of a carefully orchestrated chess match. And he understood, for now he was a pawn, yet at the right moment he could become a queen. The senator remained silent as speeches unfolded. An elder from the Cornelius line spoke of the moral responsibility of the aristocracy, while a young noble touted the candidate's contributions to the republic. Others stood merely to nod in agreement. All of this was a performance, roles assigned in advance, arguments predetermined. When he rose, the silence deepened ever so slightly. They listened, not yet with respect, but with curiosity. He did not shout. He spoke evenly, almost slowly, deliberately. Today, you propose to transfer the powers of judge to the relative of one of the consuls. Tomorrow, perhaps the powers of censor to his friend. Later, a dictator to his mentor. Tell me, where does this ladder end? At what point do we, the senators, declare, enough? He did not accuse. He posed questions. And it was precisely this that rendered him dangerous. We are not the ceremonial shadow of Rome. We are its intellect, its heart. When we abandon discussions, doubts, and debates, we forsake the very essence of the Senate. We become a chorus echoing commands. The senator gazed into the eyes of those who listened. He saw some turn away. Others bristled with anger. But some felt shame for the first time in a long time. The Senate, though it appeared as an arena for words, was in truth a battleground for competing interests. Everyone was aware of the clandestine meetings, of the dinners where the outcomes of votes were determined. They knew of the compromising evidence stashed not in archives, but in locked chests, of slaves recording conversations, of whispers on the streets that could cost a life. And yet there were those who believed that change was still possible. After the assembly, he did not depart at once. A colleague, 10 years his junior but already a praetor, stopped him. He smiled, but his eyes were sharp. Beautifully stated, but beauty does not equate to efficacy. He patted him on the shoulder. This is not the tribunal. This is the curia. Here we do not win. We survive. The senator said nothing in reply. He understood. Each time someone ascended the rostrum with a speech against the system, that very system took note. It did not forget. And it exacted its vengeance. But he was prepared. For he knew history does not craft heroes in advance. It forges them at the moment they choose to speak out when it would be easier to remain silent. In the shadows of the forums and porticos, in the alleyways between the homes of the nobility and the temples, the true fate of Rome was being determined. Popular assemblies convened ever more frequently, especially those of the tribunes. These were votes that favored not the noble but the numerous plebeian tribes. Their views did not always align with the desires of the Senate, yet they became instruments of influence, particularly in the hands of seasoned popular. Among the common people voted the legionary, the craftsman, and the merchant. Each one of them was a part of a mechanism capable of challenging the aristocracy. The senator increasingly attended these assemblies, not as an orator, but as an observer, a conversational partner, a mediator. He listened as the tribunes, the representatives of the plebs, beloved by the people but scorned by the Senate, spoke passionately. One of them, an aging man with thinning hair and calloused hands, captivated the crowd. They sit on the hills in marble, discussing the worth of the land upon which we walk barefoot. They consider themselves gods. But do gods fear questions? Why is it that every time we demand accountability, they hide behind laws? The senator understood. The popularis thrived on passion, while the optimates relied on rules. He was neither one nor the other. He sought a third path and knew that it was narrow and perilous. It was absent from the voting lists. It lay in alliances, negotiations, in a deft balance between the people and the elite. In response to the growing pressure from the streets, the Senate resorted to an old practice, extraordinary powers. A candidate for dictator was proposed, a renowned general, a friend of one of the former consuls, a loyal supporter of the optimates. Formally, this was to restore order and prevent the threat of rebellion. Unofficially, it was to crush the opposition in its infancy. The senator knew that the appointment of a dictator signaled the end of dialogue. This was a Roman trait. In exceptional circumstances, the Republic temporarily relinquished its freedoms for the sake of preservation. But who determined when a threat was real and when it was merely a pretext? He began to take action, not in the curia, but in the streets. Through trusted intermediaries, he reached out to influential merchants who faced repression with the intensification of dictatorship. He contacted old friends from the Latin alliances, promising support in exchange for influence. He prepared a speech, not for a session but for a popular assembly. There, before the plebs, he proclaimed, "Are you afraid of rebellion? Know this. Fear is the very thing that feeds us, making us forget the taste of freedom. Today they offer dictatorship. Tomorrow they will close the markets, tax your bread, send your sons to the legions without asking your opinion. If we remain silent, we consent." He did not seek support. He issued a challenge, and the crowd responded not with approval, but with anticipation. The people of Rome did not trust words. They awaited action. The next day, as the Senate convened to discuss the candidate for dictator, groups of armed citizens had already gathered in the forum. Not a mob, not a revolt, but a demonstration of resolve. The people looked upon the curia as if it were a besieged fortress. The magistrates began to feel anxious. One of the consuls, the one advocating for the dictator's candidacy, struggled to maintain his dignity, but his voice trembled. He sensed that the situation was spiraling out of control. The senator stood up at the most critical moment. He did not threaten or shout. He spoke of principles. A dictator is a sword that Rome keeps sheathed, but one cannot unsheathe it every time someone disapproves of a dispute. We cannot transform the Republic into a barracks. He knew his words would not halt the procedure, but he also understood that in these moments it is not decisions that are born, but memory. Years from now, this very speech would be quoted in debates concerning the rights of the Senate and the people. The appointment of the dictator went through after all. However, the mandate was limited, only 30 days, without the right to initiate laws, without control over the courts. Was this a victory? Number, but it was a signal. The senator recognized that in Rome no one wins forever. But if you can defend even a single day, perhaps you have afforded a chance for a month. And a month is already a beginning. He emerged from the curia in the evening. The forum was half empty. Yet an elderly woman approached him and simply said, "I listened to you. I did not understand all the words, but I believe you are not like them." He bowed to her and thought, perhaps this is the most crucial form of power, when even one person, possessing nothing but their heart, believes in you. The Republic precariously balanced between ambition and law, between sword and word. Yet, in recent weeks, that balance had been increasingly disrupted. The Senate debated, but decisions were made outside its walls, in the streets, in private homes, in the smoke-filled halls of taverns where magistrates met with merchants, and tribunes with centurions. The senator observed this, and he understood. A game was beginning in which victory went not to the righteous but to the swift. Following the brief rule of the dictator, ineffective yet sufficiently threatening, unrest erupted in Rome. It all began with the arrest of one of the popular tribunes, formally for insulting a magistrate. In reality, because he raised the issue of embezzlement in road construction. Once again the populace poured into the streets, but this time armed with stones and torches. The Roman guard struggled to cope. The Senate urgently convened a centuriate assembly to grant one of the consuls extraordinary powers. This was no longer a dictatorship, but nearly so. The consul received the right to summon the army within the city, something that was typically forbidden. The senator did not oppose this. He knew that arguing now meant losing everything. He chose a different path. That very night, he met with the commander of the praetorians, the prefect, a man indebted in his career to the senator's lineage. The conversation was brief. If blood is shed in the Subura, the streets will not forget. And if the streets do not forget, neither will the army. And you know who will be next. The prefect nodded. He understood. The army was not merely a force. It was a political player, especially in the late Republic. Generals became consuls, consuls became dictators, and those who lost the trust of the legions lost their heads. In the morning, the praetorians did not disperse the crowd. They positioned themselves between the citizens and the consular cohort. This was a silent protest, and a signal. The army no longer wished to be an instrument in the hands of others. Panic erupted in the Senate. For the first time in a long while, it was not the plebeians but the patricians themselves who cried out against lawlessness. One of the optimates proposed convening a Senate commission to investigate the actions of the tribunes. Another suggested considering reforms. Yet the majority remained silent, for they understood that a redistribution of power was underway. The senator appeared to remain on the sidelines. However, it was his people who facilitated negotiations between the factions. His speeches were quoted in pamphlets that were scattered throughout the forum under the cover of night. His name began to be whispered more frequently, not in curses, but in hushed tones. He could be the next consul. This was not what he sought, yet he realized that sometimes, to preserve the republic, one must take the lead. At one of the gatherings he presented a program: reforms for magistrates, limiting the term of consuls to 1 year without the right for re-election, the publication of all Senate decisions, and strengthening the role of the popular assemblies. This was revolutionary, yet not destructive. He proclaimed, "I do not propose a new Rome. I propose to restore the Rome as it ought to be." At first, silence. Then, applause. But it was not fervent. It was cautious. People wanted to believe but were afraid. He gained the support of a censor, an esteemed elder, who had remained in the shadows for many years. This signaled others to join him. Within a week, 3 former consuls aligned themselves with his cause. One of them remarked, "You have not changed Rome. You have made it remember." Amid these new alliances, the senator initiated the formation of a temporary council for reconciliation. It included representatives from all sides: optimates, populares, military leaders, and merchants. The task was to establish a foundation for future elections and new laws. This was perilous. He was balancing on the edge of usurping power. Yet every step he took was transparent. Every document was read aloud in the forum. Every proposal was discussed with the people. Such openness had not been seen in Rome for a long time, and at that moment the shadow of the past returned. One of the senators, connected to the former dictator, accused him of plotting a coup. Evidence was produced. Letters, allegedly penned by his hand, calling for the army to rise. The accusation was serious. But the senator did not attempt to defend himself. He demanded an investigation and proposed to temporarily suspend his political activities until the truth was established. This was a risk, but it was also a testament. Rome recognized this. The populace gathered outside the curia, demanding justice. Plebeians, craftsmen, even veterans, all understood that this was not merely about a man, but about a principle. The investigation lasted 2 weeks. In that time, forgeries were unveiled, witnesses of bribery were found, and the case against him collapsed. The senator returned to the Senate amid applause, but he knew that he was no longer just a senator. He was a symbol, and symbols in Rome outlived people, and they died harder. The Republic endured, but it had changed. There was no longer a sense of eternity. Every senator, every magistrate now realized Rome was not a machine to be controlled. It was a flame that required constant attention, strength, and sacrifice. The senator became consul the following year, without intrigues, without bloodshed, without threats. The popular assemblies supported him by an overwhelming majority, not because he promised, but because he had already acted. He did not bring radical reforms. He did not alter borders, but he taught Rome to speak again, to speak out loud in the forums, in the curiae, in the halls of the courts. He revived the culture of debate and rendered attempts at bought silence a disgrace. One of his first decrees mandated public accountability for magistrates. Consuls, praetors, aediles, now every official was required to publish their actions and expenditures at the end of their term. The people did not merely vote, they began to exert control. He also succeeded in enacting a law prohibiting individuals from holding the same magistracy twice in succession. This was aimed at those who turned elected offices into personal fiefdoms. The law impacted his allies as well. Yet he did not retreat, for he understood, if a law works only against enemies, it is not a law, but a weapon. He limited the army's role not through orders, but through respect. He initiated a reform of the legions, whereby soldiers were granted land after their service, independent of the general's will. This dismantled the legions' dependence on their commanders and strengthened their ties to Rome rather than to individual personalities. A new era began within the Senate. Those who had previously hidden behind clans and families now took to the tribunes, striving to earn support through words instead of connections. Eloquence once again became a formidable force. Speech transformed into a weapon. Debates became the arena where destinies were decided. Politics in Rome became public once more, and consequently, it also grew dangerous again. Certainly enemies did not vanish. Compromising information, blackmail, clandestine deals, these elements endured. But now they were met with resistance. Where silence had once been deemed prudent, it now became a sign of guilt. One day he was asked, "Do you truly believe you can change Rome?" He replied, "No. I believe I can prevent it from forgetting who it was." He departed this life peacefully, not at the peak of his power, but in the shadows. He declined a second consulship when he could have secured it with ease. He chose to leave when his name still commanded respect, rather than irritation. At his funeral, there was no ostentation, only a stone slab inscribed with the words, "He who did not become a dictator when he could." Rome would fall and rise many more times. Centuries would pass, forms of governance would change, walls would crumble, and new palaces would be constructed. Yet the senator's name endured, not as that of a reformer, nor as that of a hero, but as a reminder, even in an age of decay, amidst greedy, weary, and fearful people, one person can preserve the republic, not through force, but through example.